all across the nation, we are seeing stories about parents that are engaged, standing up and trying to take their schools back. On one hand, I applaud them. I believe very fervently that the education of children is charged first and foremost to the parents. The Bible, that pesky little book that the naysayers, the atheists, and basically the people that hate anything that's traditional, moral, and decent, that book that they hate, the Bible says to parents, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And we have given to government really the responsibility that was given to parents. Parents are responsible for the education of their children. So I am glad that parents have finally gotten out of this fog they have been in for about the past, 40 years, where they just drop the kids off every day at the school and then go on with their lives, just assuming that the school is teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now, I said there were some positive things that came out of this plandemic, and one of them was the fact that parents, because they were home and watching their kids' Zoom classes, began to discover for the first time what their kids were being taught and what they were not being taught. And they got upset. They got outraged. They pushed back. They wanted their voices heard. And for their efforts, they were called domestic terrorists. The National School Board sent that in to Joe Biden, who then in turn got Attorney General Garland on this, referring to them as domestic terrorists. Then, of course, those emails got out, and now everybody's running for cover. But in reality, that's exactly what happened. And now we have reports of a school board where they actually took down the Social Security numbers of the parents who came to protest and were using those Social Security numbers as a way to, if you will, bring pressure on these people and make life miserable for them. Nice people, aren't they? And even after we've just had a gubernatorial upset in the state of Virginia, and it had to do with critical race theory, in particular in the Loudoun County school system, the last time I checked, the Loudoun County School Board is still in place. So, on the one hand, I am glad that parents are engaged, and on another hand, you're wasting your time. I've talked about this before, but I feel like I need to address it at length, and as a pastor, I am going to address this biblically, so here's your warning up front. I am going to be basing this off of scriptural principle. Now, that all said, I am for doing what we can to try to take our schools back, but number one, you can't do it while your kids are still enrolled there. You do understand, at best, this is a years-long fight. You got that right. It doesn't matter if you flip a few governor mansions. It doesn't matter if you even flip a few school board members. This is going to be a years-long battle. You have tenured teachers who are deeply entrenched in their anti-American hogwash ideology. And unless you're going to be allowed to sit in on the interviews when they're hiring new teachers, do you know when they hire, where are they hiring them from? What schools, what colleges and universities are these new teachers coming from? What have they been indoctrinated in? See, we lost the colleges. And again, conservatives lost out in academics because, by and large, conservatives are doers, not just talkers. And so we went out into the world and we made industry, we made things happen, and we let, quote, the geeks and the nerds teach. Well, the geeks and the nerds, a lot of them happen to be entrenched in Marxist, socialist ideology. And they have a great influence over the minds in those classrooms. And so first, we gave up the college campus, all in the guise of diversity and the broadening of the mind and the broadening of experience. And then those universities were training the very teachers who are going to go into your child's elementary school, junior high school, high school. Do you see how this works? When Ronald Reagan won the presidency, my father was absolutely elated. And I remember he was having a conversation with a very liberal friend of his. And his friend, as he's listening to my dad talk about how happy he was that Ronald Reagan had won the presidency, and it was about time we began to right the ship that was America, this friend of his just kind of smiled, and my father finally said, "What are you smiling at?" He says, "You can have the presidency." He said, "You know, we trade this off every 4 to 8 years. The Republicans have it a while, then the Democrats have it, Republicans back and forth. So that doesn't matter." And I'll never forget, I was a teenager at the time. I'll never forget what this man said to my father. He said, as long as we, and he was referring to liberals, he said, as long as we have the classrooms and the courthouse, we have America. Let that sink in. As long as we have the classrooms and have the courthouse, and now I would add to that the media, we have the country. We control the ideology. We control the thought. We control what people think and believe and choose to do and choose to be. Where do you think kids came up with, I need a new preferred pronoun, and now we're just making pronouns up that don't actually even exist? Where does all this folderot and hogwash come from? It didn't come from around the typical family dinner table. No, nay. This came from classroom indoctrination. I have been the principal of 3 different schools. I have been saying for over 30 years, these are not public schools, these are government schools. If it was actually a public school, your input as a member of the public would be wanted and appreciated. If it was truly a public school, you would have a say in what goes on in that classroom. It's not a public school, it is a government school, which makes it an indoctrination center. Let me outline this scripturally so that you can really get a grip on what it is I'm trying to say. In the book of Daniel, if you're familiar at all with any Bible stories from a kid, Daniel in the lion's den, the book of Daniel accounts for when Babylon took control of Israel, took them captive. And in Daniel chapter 1, the king gives some instructions that he wants the best and the brightest that Israel has to offer. In fact, in verse 4, it reads of Daniel chapter 1, children in whom there is no blemish, well favored, skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, understanding science, and such as has ability to stand in the king's palace, in whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave the names, unto Daniel, Belteshazzar, unto Hanani, Shadrach, unto Mishael, Meshach, unto Azariah, Abednego. Let me just stop right there. Let me set the contextual background of what's happening. Babylon has taken control of Israel, and now King wants Israel's best. He wants their brightest. And so he sends his people to round up the best and the brightest of Israel's young people and to bring them to Babylon. Number 1, take them out of their home environment. Take them out of their home environment. How are you going to save your kids? How are you going to turn your schools around when you know it's going to take years to fix? This is not simply saying, we struck down CRT. You may have struck down the name, but you haven't struck down the corrupt teaching that it is. It'll just be repackaged as something else. Just like Common Core. We've gotten rid of Common Core. No, you really haven't. It's just been renamed something else. There is dangerous ideology at work in our classrooms. Anti-American, revisionist history, embellishment, because it's all about indoctrination. And even if you successfully take over your local district's school board, you've got tenured teachers, you've got decades of this just wretched ideology which has poisoned the hearts and minds of our young people. That isn't going to be overturned in a year or two. And think about how many hours a day during the school year your children spend away from you. I mean, from the time they get dropped off at school till you see them again after young elementary age, it's about what? 7 hours? As they get to be older, if they get involved in any extracurricular activities, it could be 9, 10, 12 hours a day your children spend away from you. They've been taken out of their home environment, removed from that which is familiar. See, in your home, it's comfortable. In your home, they're accepted. In your home, what you have to say to them, the faith, the values, the things that you teach them, it's not challenged. It's accepted. It's your kid's safe zone. But you take them out of that safe zone, and the things that you have taught them, the things that you have instructed them in, are not only challenged, they are ridiculed, they are made fun of, they are attacked, they are vilified. Do you know how Adolf Hitler took over Germany? It wasn't just his impassioned speeches and his ruthless political way that he rose to power. Still, even after he took the chancellery, it would be years before he dared launch war. First, he had to build up an army. But more than that, he had to build up a loyalty. He had to build up a generation that believed what he was saying. He knew that the older adults would simply just kind of roll their eyes and put up with it because they were pragmatic to whatever political power happened to be ruling at the time. But he wanted true disciples, people who really believed. So, the schools. You ought to do a study sometime on the Nazis and education. The little boys that started out as the Hitler Youth became the SS less than 10 years later. Think about that. Think about that. Think about how you as an adult, okay, you'll recycle if you gotta, but your kids are absolutely convinced that when you finish your ice cream down at the local ice cream shop and it's styrofoam cup and plastic spoon and you pitch it into the trash, that you are killing the planet. Do you see where I'm going with this? Do you understand how deep this is? They've got your kids' hearts and minds because they've taken them out of their home environment. Now notice who here in Babylon they focused on. Children that there was no blemish. These were smart kids. They wanted the best of the best of the best of the best. Because the others would follow along anyway. But they had to turn the smart kids, the thinking kids, the ones who were sharp. And they wanted to teach them the learning and the tongue of the Chaldean. So it wasn't enough to take them out of their home environment. They had to then expose them to a whole new culture. A whole new way of thinking, a whole new way of acting, a whole new way of talking. They had to literally be transformed from the inside out, a complete transformation. So they changed their home, changed their culture. There are things that your kids get exposed to younger and younger. Sometimes we hear about in the news what teachers have been exposing kids to, like a teacher who takes her third grade class to a gay bar for a field trip. Kindergarten students that are exposed to it's okay to love people like your mommy and daddy love each other who have the same body parts as you. And then they're told to strip naked so they can fully see what their body parts look like. I mean, this stuff in any logical setting would be considered grotesque, perverted, child pornography, endangerment of a minor, but because it's done under the guise of education, change their location, change their culture. Notice here, they changed their names. Now again, some of you might have a cursory understanding of some Bible stories, and you've heard about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, I've heard that Bible story before. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not their actual names. Their Hebrew names were Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Each one of those Hebrew names meant something in the Hebrew tongue. It meant something about their relationship with Jehovah God. So they were given new names to identify with Babylonian gods. You see, by changing the name, you change their identity. And that's the final cherry on the sundae, dot on the I, T crossed, whatever analogy you want to use here. We change their location. We change their culture. We change their identity. Do your kids see themselves as American citizens? Or do they see themselves as citizens of the world? We have organizations and companies now that are constantly, they have gone so woke that now when they talk about themselves, like the Oscars this past year, when they were welcoming everyone to the Academy Awards and telling everybody about the theater that they were sitting in. This was the land that used to belong to the native peoples of, and fill in the blank. Well, I'm sorry. It's not enough to just say we're in America. We're in Los Angeles. That's part of America. Oh, no. Nay. Because remember, America's bad. Remember, America was founded by racists. America, we've got to get the names of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln off of our schools. These were racist pigs. Remember the old white guys that wrote the Constitution. They were all slave owners. We can't follow a document that was written out of this type of visceral hatred. Do you see what's been done to your kids? Hey, I'm not saying don't fight to take your schools back, but here's what I am saying. While you're fighting, get your kids out of there. Get your kids out of there. Do you love your kids? You probably do. That's why you're fighting for your schools. I remember several years ago, I was serving as a pastor in another state, and we were going to hire a youth pastor. And I couldn't make up my mind if I wanted to hire a man with some experience or, a guy fresh out of college who, hadn't picked up bad habits at another ministry. And so I was reaching out to some of my pastor friends at the time, asking their input as to what they thought I should do. And I remember one of them asked me something interesting. He said, I'm not saying don't hire a guy right out of college, but he should have some youth experience of some kind. Even while he was in college, he should have been active in a church somewhere, working as a lay youth leader. And I remember he asked me this. He said, you got kids that are going to be teenage members of this youth group at some point. And he asked me this. He said, do you love your kids? I said, well, of course I love my kids. And then he asked me this. Well, are your kids lab rats? I said, of course not. He said, so you don't want them experimented on by a novice who doesn't know what they're doing. Message received, loud and clear. Do you love your kids? Then why are you leaving them in those government indoctrination centers where they are being poisoned like lab rats? Do I have to draw a Dr. Fauci beagle puppy analogy here? You do know that there are certain things that they expose these kids in the classroom that even they are not 100% certain if it's going to work or not, so they experiment this crap on your kids. I know. You were a member of the football team back in your day, and you want your son to have the same experience. Really? So you would lose their hearts, their minds, their affection and love for you as their parent, their love of loyalty for their country. You would sacrifice all that so they could wear the same stupid Letterman jacket you did? Now I'm going to be really blunt here. Pull your head out of your arse and understand that what's happening in that public school, which was bad 30 years ago, is 100 times worse today. So get over your nostalgic euphoria for what you think is going on in that school and stop thinking that once you get a couple of school board members on there to flip some votes around, that it's all just going to magically change. You are in for a year's plural battles. And while you're battling and while you're retaking your schools and while you are screening your new incoming teachers and making sure that you're not just hiring a bunch of woke whack jobs coming in to experiment on kids, at the same time you're waiting for some of these tenured poison deliverers to finally retire, get your kids in a private school. Do a homeschool collective, Christian school, private school, charter school, but get them out of the indoctrination center. Look, we can talk ad nauseum, and it's awesome to see some of these parents, unmask our kids, no CRT here. I love it. I love seeing people engaged. But your kids are far too important. And you need to understand this battle is far, far bigger than one election or two. Get your kids out of the public school. Hey, that's it for this little happy rant. Make sure you're a subscriber to the channel, smack the bell, click the word all to get notification of my next rant.